Oh, Captain, my Captain. Welcome to week 11 here on Oh, Captain, my Captain, Club Fantasy's DFS Showdown slate preview video. We're going to be talking Commanders and Eagles, and our guy Austin, our DFS expert here at Club Fantasy, is going to break it down, giving you the best captains for your Showdown slate, as well as the most optimal choices to fill out those flex spots. So stay tuned. Welcome to Oh Captain, my Captain here on Club Fantasy FFL. I am your host, Joshua Hudson. You can find me on the socials at the one Hudsonian. That's the number one. And of course, our DFS expert, Austin Amandolia at Austin_FFL. Austin, we ready to talk some Thursday night football?
Yeah, I mean, it's just an exciting matchup. It's got your team in it.
Yeah, I know. And I'm waiting for you to throw some water all over my Eagles or Commanders or something. Like I'm just waiting for it because I have a feeling we're going to be disagreeing on quite a bit throughout this segment. But I just want to point out really quick, I absolutely love that on the show sheet you put WFT for Washington because they are and forever will be the Washington football team to me. I absolutely love that. But before we get into all the topics at hand, let's talk Austin really quick and remind everybody how they can play these showdown slates against us here at Club Fantasy.
Yeah, so you can follow a link in the show description to join our league on DraftKings. We host 2 contests every week. One is for the Thursday night showdown slate where you can practice some of the things we talk about here, maybe take our money. Nothing else. You can hang out with us. And then on Sundays, we also play the main slate. You can watch our DFS Academy show on Fridays to hear me and Ryan talk about our strategies for the main slate. So you get 2 chances every week to play with us. They're $2 contests, 12 people. You only have to beat 11 people to 5x your money. It's really nice. It's a fun way to hang out and to get better at DFS.
Absolutely. And before we get into everything, let's talk about our sister site's partnership with Trophy Smack. You, of course, can head over to trophysmack.com/WOFF. That's WOFF for all of your achievement-based needs. Show off those belts and rings and trophies and wall art and smack, whatever you want to call it. Celebrate your wins. You beat us in DFS, customize a piece of art that says, Club Fantasy, you suck at this, and I fucking rock. That is how you show us some love. Use that unique affiliate link, trophysmack.com/WOFF, WOFF, which you can find in the description on the video on YouTube or wherever you are listening to this podcast. All the commissions that we earn from this link go towards us helping women attend some of these NFL media events that we are able to send them to, i.e. the Super Bowl, the NFL draft, the scouting combine. All of this is valuable experience as these ladies get, find their way into these careers that they want to choose from. So once again, trophysmack.com/WOFF, and you can be a champion for women of fantasy football. All right, Austin. First category, let's get into the Captain Chalk. This, of course, is the chalky captain on the Thursday night slate that everyone is likely to pick because they are just that damn good. And of course, we got to start with the guy who is second in the NFL in rushing, but had a little bit of a disappointing week in week 10, and that would be Eagles star running back Saquon Barkley.
Yes, Saquon Barkley. Now, I should say one thing about this category before we get into Barkley himself. I tend to go with the good chalk whenever I pick this because the quarterbacks are going to be the most common captains. They always are. But I like looking at okay, where is there going to be a lot of chalk, but it's also advantageous. I like it with Saquon Barkley this week. I think this is an interesting matchup because both of these teams, per the stats, have been limiting opponents to in terms of fantasy points in recent weeks, which would make you think this game could hit an under. There could be a lot of kickers involved. We've seen Washington have games where all they do is kick field goals. In that type of matchup where this game hits the under, I do think Saquon Barkley is really interesting. He's touching the ball so much. He's getting 20 touches a game. I don't think Jalen Hurts is going to continue to take away touchdowns from him at the rate that he is. He will do it here and there, but 8 rushing touchdowns by Jalen Hurts in 4 weeks is absurd. So I think it's going to swing back to Saquon Barkley. He's going to be highly rostered in the captain spot, and I think it's totally fine to go that direction, particularly if you're betting on a game that hits the under.
Yeah, this game's not hitting the under. It's Thursday night. It's a rivalry game. These teams are going to slug it out. I want every freaking Eagle I can possibly get.
Because we have,
except for this guy in the next category that you have. Okay. I don't have much to add on Saquon Barkley. He has 8 total touchdowns this year, 6 on the season. He's second in the league in rushing. Sign me up. Washington's defense has been better of late, but look, it's still Saquon Barkley. You're not sitting him. You definitely want to start him. But of course, our second category here is called the Mutineer. These are your contrarian captain choices that offer variety and upside in some of the larger tournaments. And you know what? I'm going to stay on the Eagles train here, Austin, because I need you to explain to me why you think Devonta Smith is the guy when it has become pretty proven that when AJ Brown plays, Devonta Smith is an afterthought in this offense.
Because this is about a single game, and I'm trying to get different. It's really, and it's honestly, it is a game theory move. It's saying, you know what, people are going to be in on AJ Brown, and historically speaking, the wide receiver 2 is just as likely to be the optimal captain spot as the wide receiver 1 in showdown slates. So I love pivoting to the wide receiver 2, especially when that wide receiver 1 looks particularly chalky. So I'm going with Devonta Smith, and we have seen some precedent recently of the Commanders giving up kind of downfield targets, which AJ Brown has that in his bag. I don't want to act like AJ, that's not his role. He also can get a nice 30-yard chunk. But that is especially Devonta Smith's bag. We see him constantly catch passes down the field, which end up not being passes, catches half the time, and somehow they count anyways. I feel like that's Devonta Smith's skill set, is he like catches these 50-yard bombs and it actually touches the ground a little bit, but nobody calls it, so then they just move on and everything's fine. I'm betting on a couple of those. We just saw Mike Williams get into the end zone in his first week at with Pittsburgh against the Commanders. I think that type of model is something that's viable for Devonta Smith. And if you're like Josh and you think this game hits the over, I think Devonta Smith is going to be a key aspect of it, as I'm sure AJ Brown would be. Also, from a salary perspective, it's really hard to set a lineup with AJ Brown in the captain spot. I think it's worth trying. Like, there are so many potentially good captains in this matchup. I just really like Devonta Smith because I think he can easily go overlooked.
I won't disagree with that. Because, again, we've seen A.J. Brown get banged up this year, and usually when he ends up having to leave the game or whatever, Devonta Smith takes over. That's the beauty of this team. But my concern here, okay, Jalen Hurts has not been asked to throw the football much since the bye week. He has not topped 25 pass attempts in a single game over his last 5. When A.J. Brown plays, A.J. Brown's been getting the chunk yards. He's actually averaging 19.8 yards per catch this season. Devonta Smith's down at 13.2. So they're using A.J. Brown more so in those big plays, which, again, I'm not saying that Devonta Smith can't. And I wholeheartedly agree with you in the sense that let's get different. Because, again, this game could go crazy and they need to throw more. And Jalen Hurts will ultimately top, 30 pass attempts and it becomes a shootout. Because when we get to your next guy, if that guy hits, it's going to be a shootout straight up. So, and I will agree wholeheartedly. AJ Brown is more expensive, straight up. When you have to plug in these more expensive guys in these captain spots, you do have to get different elsewhere. So by putting the lesser expensive guy, you're hoping for those different game theory spots. And this is where I said in the intro, Austin, we were going to disagree, but the math, it will work in your favor. I promise you that.
Yeah, well, and a little bit later we'll get into a lineup that I've built that will emphasize why Devonta Smith is such an intriguing play.
All right, we'll get into that in a second, but let's talk about this other alternative captain here, and of course, we're talking about the rookie star quarterback for the Commanders, Mr. Jaden Daniels.
Yeah, so I do think I actually want to emphasize potentially using a Washington Commander in the captain spot this week because it is a pretty close over under. It's 3.5 points. And usually when I will pick the favorite team and emphasize them in the captain spot. But we've been seeing some of the underdogs win games outright recently on Thursday night matchups and in primetime spots in general. And it's reminded me that we can't always just rely on the betting lines to be accurate and to tell us that exactly what the game is going to happen. And so I've thought about how could this game go different ways? How might it go against our expectations? And one way for that to happen is for the Commanders to pull it out. And I think if they do that, Jaden Daniels is going to soak up a lot of volume in this. And I think he's the most interesting. Well, he's not the most interesting. He's one of the more interesting commanders to have at the captain spot. I'll talk about another commander in a minute, and we'll talk about using him in the captain spot as well. But Jaden Daniels, he has the ability to get it on the ground and through the air, much like Jalen Hurts. So I like it from that perspective. I also like it because I think that there could be there's probably going to be like just one or two pass catchers on the Washington Commanders side that get in the end zone, realistically. And outside of that, it's probably going to be a running back rushing it in or Jaden Daniels rushing it in. And so because of that, I like taking the quarterback to be in my captain spot here because he's more likely to soak up a higher volume of the fantasy points. So I like the idea of going with Jaden Daniels there also because I think he will get a little bit lower roster than someone like Jalen Hurts, who I think is going to be heavily, heavily rostered.
Yeah, the Eagles defense has been absolutely lights out since their bye week. But when you look at their schedule, basically, they played one good offense, and that's the Cincinnati Bengals. So, you can take that with a grain of salt and be like, oh, well, the matchups are kind of masking the production, et cetera, et cetera. And if you believe that, then I think that Jaden Daniels becomes an optimal play here as the captain spot because again, most people are going to look at those points against and see the green or the red or whatever. And they're going to say, oh, well, Jaden Daniels, this isn't a great matchup for him. So I like that. All right, let's get into the first mate because every captain needs a reliable crew. These are going to be the standouts to maximize your lineups. Let's stay on that commander side because, Austin, we were talking a little bit before we started recording this, and I'm a little bit down on Terry McLaurin this week. But again, I'm talking more for redraft purposes. Terry McLaurin has done extremely well against the Philadelphia Eagles in his career. He's going to put this defense to the test. So why do you like him as a first mate this week?
Yeah, well, I mean, he's done well against the Eagles in general, and he's done really well this year. I've been very surprised to see some of his game logs. He's been consistently scoring like 15, 20 fantasy points. And I think last week was a particularly interesting example to me where he performed really well. He had 5 catches for 113 yards. This is the thing. It's not very high volume. Like he's not getting a ton of like 10, 12 target games, right? He's got one game with 10 targets. And outside of that, the highest number of targets he's getting in a game is 8. But he's been getting a lot of efficiency and he's getting touchdowns. So I think about what he did last week against Pittsburgh. And yes, it's a different defense, but Pittsburgh has a decent defense as well. Like it's not like they did this against the Jaguars, right? McLaurin ends up with 5 receptions, 113 yards, ends up scoring nearly 20 DraftKings points without scoring a touchdown. And that's what starts to make my light bulb go off on this. Like the Eagles, they're a really good offense. They're going to push. I think they're going to push the Commanders to have to throw the ball and to stay competitive. And I think that's just going to benefit Terry McLaurin. So if he gets in the end zone, I think he's just going to rack up enough volume. I think he's an interesting captain play too for that situation if the Commanders end up pulling this game out, or if they're just having to push to keep up with the Eagles and Jaden Daniels just pumps volume towards Terry McLaurin.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting because, as I mentioned, this Eagles secondary has been really good since the bye week in week 5. Terry McLaurin last year, 2 games against the Eagles, 2 games over 100 yards, scored a touchdown in both of those games. He hasn't had less than, I believe, 83 yards in his last 4 meetings against the Eagles. One interesting note, though, on Terry McLaurin, over the last 3 weeks, he's actually 3rd on the team in target share, if you believe that, behind Noah Brown and Zach Ertz. That was a really interesting stat when I found that. So, just throwing that out there. Revenge game for Zach Ertz could be a play here. But let's switch gears. Let's go over to the quarterback on the other side. We already talked about Jaden Daniels. Jalen Hurts has 8 rushing touchdowns over his last 4 games, 10 on the season. There's a lot to like, obviously, about Jalen Hurts. He's probably going to be one of the most, if not the most expensive guys on this slate.
Yeah, he is the most expensive player on this slate, and he honestly, he's probably going to be like 80-90% rostered in field. So some of it's like you just play him because everybody else is doing it and you don't worry about it. Some of this is just a reminder, like he has been really good. Like it's not just it's not like, oh, this has been fluky. Like he's been playing really well and definitely been good from a fantasy perspective. So I think you almost have to have him in your lineup. I definitely would be concerned about playing him in a lineup where I also have Saquon Barkley because they are very clearly competing for touchdowns this year. I think we expected that, but to me, it's almost been even heightened more than I anticipated it being this year. I kind of thought it was like, oh, we won't get a 3 touchdown Saquon game, but he'll get a touchdown and Hurts will get a touchdown. There's been times where it's been like, no, Hurts is just getting 3 touchdowns, 2 touchdowns, 1 touchdown, and Saquon's getting none. So I would say shy away from that, but I will say too, like part of the reason I'm playing Jalen Hurts is there's not a ton of options to save money this week. There's not like a clear like wide distribution. Like sometimes, like when we play the Bengals is a great example of a team like they spread the ball around a ton, so you can get really creative and pick some of these randos to put in your lineup. Philadelphia, it's like four dudes that are the core, and then there's like 1 or 2 kind of role players, but it's way harder to get creative. So I am leaning in towards playing guys like that I can rely on, like Jalen Hurts.
Yeah, it's been that way with the Eagles for probably the better part of like 3-4 years, going back to when Shane Steichen was the offensive coordinator. They centralized their targets. It's a pretty clear top 3 with AJ Brown, Devonta Smith, Dallas Goedert. This offseason, they bring in Saquon Barkley and now Dallas Goedert. And honestly, to a degree, Devonta Smith's kind of been an afterthought too. So, it's definitely a lot more difficult. I was curious about this, Austin, because it just popped in my head when we were talking about Jalen Hurts. Obviously, he's going to be the most expensive rostered. And you talked about some of the not so great lower priced options. Did you actually try building a roster with Jalen Hurts as a captain just to see how gross it is?
I did not, but the closest I got was I tried it with AJ Brown, who is also really expensive, and it is pretty gross. And we will get to that because that is why I started to pivot to Devonta Smith, because even with a guy like Devonta Smith as your captain spot, it gets gross really quickly.
Okay. I just wanted to bring that up because I wanted to kind of explain to the people that are listening, like just because, DFS isn't always about playing the best players. You have to sort of mix and match when it comes to the salary plus production. So just wanted to bring that up. All right. Next categories are deck scrubbers. These are going to be your cheaper punt play options that can make or break a lineup based on one play and or limited opportunity. We already kind of touched on how the Eagles sort of centralize their targets. Not surprising that you don't have any Eagles in this section. So let's talk about Noah Brown, who is tied for the league lead with the Commanders.
Yeah, well,
in target share over the last 3 weeks.
We're going to talk about Noah Brown, but then we're going to have to refresh your memory on the Eagles roster because there's definitely an Eagles player in this segment. But we'll start with
not in the deck scrubbers. You're looking at the Kraken.
Yeah, no, you're looking at you. Oh, wait a minute. I think I mixed up my teams. Wait a minute.
Yeah.
Okay, hold up. I'll tell you what happened here. Let's just talk about Olamide Zaccheaus right now, because if you go to him on DraftKings,
he was on the Eagles last year.
It still has a little picture of him in an Eagles uniform.
Eagles last year, that's why.
I was just like, oh, Eagles, cool. Olamide Zaccheaus. And I checked. I was like, oh, he's getting targets here and there. Wow. Way to go, Eagles. Look at you. Look at you trying to get different. Okay. Well, that changes things a lot. So, anyways.
Do not be fooled by pictures, people.
Yeah. Geez. Glad that happened here. Okay. So, Noah Brown, we already talked about him. He's getting a lot of volume, which is really exciting because we need ways to get different. He ranks 3rd on this team across the season for targets. He has 37 targets across the year, which, isn't lighting the world on fire, but he's played a pretty consistent role. And I'm looking for cheap options who might be involved. Noah Brown, we've seen him at times, and when he was in Houston, like he can get in the end zone. He's been a really good role player. He's gotten in the end zone with this team, and I think too, like if you're playing a lineup that you don't have Terry McLaurin in, I think Noah Brown becomes particularly interesting because, as Josh mentioned, the Philadelphia cornerbacks have played really well, and I think this is an interesting pivot point to say, okay, well, if I'm betting on the Eagles to win, then I'm gonna bet that McLaurin doesn't get there, that he gets shadowed by one of the cornerbacks, or that they really just focus on keeping him from beating them. And if that happens, then Noah Brown's going to be the guy getting open underneath and getting more of the targets, being that second read guy. So I think it's just kind of a pivot off of McLaurin based on how you think the game script is going to go.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about Zaccheaus. And the reason I want to bring this up, not because he was a former Eagle, now Commander, but he kind of started the season as sort of this, being a lot more involved in this offense as Luke McCaffrey started to, slowly pick things up and into the game. And, he's running a lot more out of the slot, and Zaccheaus was kind of that guy first. So, again, you're looking at, limited opportunities, punt plays, one big play here and there. I think another guy that you could potentially throw into this mix would be De'Ami Brown, who I believe is probably as cheap, if not less expensive as well.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think, again, it's about like pivoting. If you're thinking this game really pops off and you don't want to play a kicker, which I'm intrigued by this week, then like you need to find one of those like kind of down bad, particularly commander receivers. I am going to also throw out Grant Calcaterra as a potential option just because he's been involved. He's still been staying involved, even though Dallas Goedert has come back. Now, maybe that continues to fade as Goedert is healthier. But also Calcaterra is really freaking cheap. He's 1K. And I will talk about this more later, but I am more open to giving up a position than I usually am. Part of it's because of the nature of these teams. Part of it's because the team that won the Eagles Cincinnati Bengals slate that we talked about last week took a goose egg and took all of the great players and had Jamar Chase at the captain spot and just said, you know what? I don't need a point from my sixth guide. That's fine. And it worked out for them. So it is possible. I don't want to count on it every time, but I think this is a week where I'm going to do it.
Are you trying to say 50, 60 point outbursts aren't the norm? Come on, Austin.
Yes, not the norm. But I like the idea of taking a very cheap guy that might goose egg, but also might get me a touchdown in order to get some of the higher upside guys elsewhere.
Makes sense. All right, friendly reminder, you too can play these Thursday night showdown slates against us. You can also play the Sunday night and Monday night slates. If you hit the link in the description of the video here on YouTube or on your podcast feed, wherever you're listening to this podcast, come play these. There's 12-person tournaments. A lot of us here at Club Fantasy hop into these. They're $2 contests, and it's a lot of fun because sometimes we win, sometimes you win. More often than not, you win. It's okay. Anyway, let's get into this last category. One of my favorites. This is the Kraken, the lineup traps that sink the ship. We've talked a little bit about Devonta Smith already, and you think it is a crime. Do not let people overlook Devonta Smith.
Yeah, I think he's going to be a key part of the lineup. I think he is the easiest way to get different on this slate that provides you high upside. I love the idea of playing him as a captain this week. He is cheaper than Terry McLaurin in the captain spot, even which I feel like is incredibly disrespectful personally. But what I like about this is it actually provides a pathway for you to get both Devonta Smith and AJ Brown. Let's say that you just think Josh is full of shit and Jalen Hurts is going to throw the ball a ton this game, and he's going to have to throw it 35, 40 times because the Commanders are going to be tough against the run, which there's a lot of ifs there. But I like this scenario. I like thinking about like, okay, yeah, Jalen Hurts hasn't done a lot through the air. What if he's forced to in this game? If he does, let's put Devonta Smith in the captain spot, stack him with Jalen Hurts. Oh, we can also fit AJ Brown if we play Noah Brown, Grant Calcaterra, and Zane Gonzalez, which I like because we have seen the Commanders struggle to score touchdowns at times. They are good at getting close enough to score field goals, but they don't always finish the job. So if we say like, there's a few field goals involved and the Eagles push. I really like the idea of Devonta Smith as a captain. I feel like it creates a lot of opportunities to get different. So I will make that my primary trap in this game. The other one, though, is also about an Eagle player, and it's Paris Campbell, who you may look and you'd be like, oh, Paris Campbell, he's had some really pop games here and there when he was in Indy. He is on the practice squad. He's not active. Don't play him. And this kind of circles back to my point about Grant Calcaterra. I'm not going to just take a goose egg player to take a goose egg player for the salary reason. I'm going to find a player that at least gives me the opportunity for some points, who may also goose egg, but I'm not going to just do it and say, oh, $200, a person that's not even going to be active or play, just so that I can get the expensive guys.
Yeah, the Eagles have been kind of relying on Johnny Wilson and Jahan Dotson in that wide receiver 3 style role. Campbell's been up and down, hasn't had a single target even since week 7. So when I saw him on this list, I was like, it's not even on the roster. Why the fuck bring him up? But you bring up good points, because that's what people will look at. They'll just look at salary sometimes when they're setting these lineups before all the inactives start to come out, around 6:30, et cetera, whatever it may be. So kudos to you, Austin. Love it. All right. Friendly reminder one last time. Go to trophysmack.com/WOFF. That's WOFF for all of your achievement-based needs. Get your championship belts, rings, trophies. Wall Smack, it is all customizable. Celebrate, show us some love here at Club Fantasy, Women in Fantasy Football, and help us provide more opportunities for women in the not only fantasy football space, but also the world of sports. All right. This has been Oh Captain, My Captain, previewing the Week 11 Thursday night football game between the Washington Commanders, a.k.a. the football team, and the Philadelphia Eagles. He is Austin at Austin_FFL. I am Josh at the one Hudsonian. That's the number 1. We will see everybody here next week for the Week 12 Thursday night football preview video. Take it easy, everybody.